Okay, everybody, it's just a little after 6:30, so we'll begin our meeting. I call this meeting of the Devine Independent School District Board of Trustees to order at 6:32. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Let the record show that trustees Henry Moreno, Carrie James, Chris Davis, Allie Buvenhausen, and Nancy Pepper are present. Do we have any citizens' communication on this bond issue? Okay. The one thing that we have on the agenda tonight is to consider and act on an order calling for a bond election to be held in the district. We have lots of things to talk about and to go over. I think first we would like to hear from our financial advisor on what amount of money is available and what we can foresee in taxes with whatever we do.
Good evening, Ms. Pepper, Superintendent, members of the board, and staff. For the record, Robert Tijerina with Tijerina, Galvan, and Lawrence. We are the school district's financial advisor. And also with me is a bond counsel, and they prepared the actual documents that if you do decide to call the bond election amount, they'll be able to finalize the documents for the school district. I handed out a presentation, and again, we've been working closely with Dr. Grandjean and Ms. Amidas and preparing the scenarios for you. And we summarized everything on the handout. And on page 2, we ran, 5 cases from left to right, starting with column D. Case A for $11,665,000 bond election. It's on column D, row 5. And on column F, we ran another scenario titled Case B for $20,120,000. Case C on column H for $25 million. On column J, we ran another case titled D for $28 million. And the last column, L, we ran the last scenario, Case C, for $32,925,000. All scenarios ran 30 years, and we used current market rates, which you can find on row 12 at about 4.14%. And before I go into the scenarios, kind of want to talk about what has, the environment, the market, construction costs, interest rates, bond elections, other school districts throughout the state in the last year. If I remember correctly, and I shared this with your staff and with some of y'all, in 2022, almost 200 school districts called bond elections combined in May and November for over $32 billion. And those amounts were as low as, maybe a couple of $1 million bond election all the way up north of $2 billion bond election. And interest rates in 2022 increased over 400 basis points, starting in March to, I think, the first week in December was the last Fed increase. And then we had one recently on February the 1st where interest rates went up about 1/4 point. Interest rates are still projected to go up this calendar year, anywhere from 50 basis points probably to another 100 basis points. And again, the cost of construction has gone up. And these are things that I see and hear being in the audience with other school district clients, hearing architects, engineers, and the cost of construction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if it's a school project or if it's water and sewer, curb gutter drainage, paving for cities or counties. We're seeing that cost increase 20% plus. We had one client that had an elementary school for about $41 million and change, and now that same meat and potato elementary school is about $53 million a year later. So again, the cost is risen. I think Mr. Modena brought up a great point. Thank goodness the board had, the vision, the desire, and the opportunity was there to do this facility many years ago. Imagine what would that cost be now? We at least 2 to 3 times that cost, whatever it was years ago. So we're seeing a lot of clients pursue bond elections for safety, equipment, renovations, new constructions, and a lot of the issuers or school districts last year went out for those reasons. Interest rates were going up. The cost of construction was rising. The other factor was permanent school fund bond insurance, which cost school districts $1,500 to bump up your bond rating up to a AAA. And a lot of school districts were hurrying up to try to see if they could apply and receive that insurance on their successful bond election, whether it was May of last year or November. Now, as of recent, I believe Austin ISD passed their May election for 2.2. When they applied for permanent school fund bond insurance, they were rejected by TEA and saying, no, we're going to save this insurance for school districts that have lower bond ratings. So the district here, we have a bond rating of A+. So there's a really good chance a bond election is called, assuming in May it passes, that there's a really great opportunity that you can apply and receive permanent school fund bond insurance for $1,500. All your INS debt, interest and sinking fund debt that has been voted approved, all those refundings that we have outstanding have PSF, permanent school fund bond insurance, and it always costs $1,500. If you don't receive PSF, if you're a school district that applied and don't receive it, and you want to go out and purchase private bond insurance, it won't cost $1,500. It's going to be a certain basis point of whatever your principal and interest combined on the loan you're looking at. So it could easily be $25,000 to $200,000 on private bond insurance. What we know, private bond insurance, there's nobody out there AAA like permanent school fund bond insurance. So those were a lot of factors of why a lot of school districts went in November. Mainly that it was heavy in November than it was last May, but combined, I think it was over $32 billion. And you still have a lot of school districts from the last couple of days that I looked. There was a couple of school districts that called less south of $1 billion, 800, I think, 600 million. I called one yesterday for $2 million, and it's all, again, safety and security issues. And then we called another one on Monday for about 166 million, safety and security, renovations, new construction. And the same concerns were also rising interest rates. If we don't do anything now, what is it going to cost us next year in 2024? Is it going to be 15%, 20% more? We all know it's not going to be the same. It's going to be at a higher cost next year. If you keep the same footprint, the same project, everything that you're looking at now, and you do it next year, it's probably going to be more. So the scenarios we ran were provided by your staff, and like I said, from 11.6 million all the way to 32.9 million from column D through L. Now we did talk with your other consultant, Moak and Casey. They're the experts on the M&O maintenance and operation tax rate side. And if you notice on column B, we have the districts on row 7, column B, total tax rate. $1.0946, and that pretty much consists of your maintenance and operation and your INS of roughly 85 cents and change and 24 cents. If the district does not call a bond election, for May, there's an opportunity that we know that the cash defeasance that you'd approved last August will expire at the end of this fiscal year in June. So that tax rate decrease on column B, row 8, roughly 10 cents, 10.9 cents, that's the bulk of that decrease, roughly 10 cents. That defeasance that you approved is paying off about 600 and some thousand, just south of $700,000. You're going to save money on that defeasance. We close on that financing on March the 1st. So you use those pretty much 10 cents to pay off debt that you have in place. And you save money on that cash defeasance. So we know that only lasts for one fiscal year. So if no bond election is called in May, there's an opportunity to continue, do another defeasance for this summer that will impact fiscal year 24. So that's the bulk of that 10.9 cent drop. The other one is the other penny is that 1 cent M&O compression. And this is a conservative estimate that Moak and Casey provided your staff, that the state is requiring all school districts to do a compression. This school district used to be at $1.17 back in 2018, 2019. Just 4 years ago, you're at $1.17 and now you're at 85.9 cents. So again, you've done that with the request of the state. You've lowered your M&O and the state has provided, since you dropped that tax rate, provided that additional funding on the M&O side. So again, if no bond election is called and you don't call a defeasance this summer, we're looking at a total tax rate next fiscal year on column B, row 9, of roughly 98.53 cents, just under 99 cents. So if you do call a defeasance, we know we're going to be right around that $1.09 or so, $1.10. If you do call a defeasance for the same amount, keeping everything in place, that's the opportunity the board can consider this summer. So if we notice on column D, what could we do? What could the school district do as far as dollar amount? Don't know the projects, but as far as dollar amount, what could we do without increasing the tax rate? On column D, a bond election for $11,665,000, there's no tax rate increase. It's actually going to be less. If you notice on column D, row 8, it's a negative amount of a penny roughly. So the total tax rate projected for fiscal year 24, and we're assuming a conservative 5% property value growth. And we know, being in the appraisal district, the appraisal business, evaluations are still growing, maybe not as fast as they were before, but we don't think the district's going to be flat. So there's a 5% growth that staff have provided us with. So again, $11,665,000 will keep the total tax rate actually less than it is this current fiscal year. So no tax rate increase for $11,665,000. Interest rate again on row 12, column D, 4.14, 4.15%. Now the other scenarios we ran, they're larger, and so they're going to require a net tax rate increase. So on column F, we have a 6.75 cents of a tax rate increase. So your tax rate will go up 6.75 cents to $1.16, and that's on row 9, column F. So again, 6.75 net tax rate increase for a bond election of $20,120,000. Column H, the $25 million scenario, we're looking at a net tax rate increase, and this is on column H, row 8, 11.9 cents. The scenario case D for $28 million, we have a net tax rate increase of roughly 14.5 cents for $28 million. And on case E, for the last scenario, $32,935,000, we have a net tax rate increase of 18.64 cents. And again, there's a 1 cent compression. The Moak and Casey, the consultant, said there possibly could be another 2 cent compression applied there. We won't know until well after the election, sometime in late May when the session's over with. The other thing we all are hearing, I guess in May, we all voted, I think all of us did, when we saw the proposition, homestead exemption increased 25 to 40,000, we all said yes. Well, there's discussions there to increase that from 40 to possibly 70, 75. We don't know exactly the exact amount or when that's going to happen, but that's another scenario that's being discussed, situation that's being discussed probably this coming session too. So again, M&O compression, we won't know exactly how many pennies will be compressed until after the election. And the homestead exemption, we won't know exactly if it's going to increase above the 40,000 to 70 or 75. So again, those are the increases that we ran on those 5 scenarios. And on page 3 and 4, these are the key indicators. Okay, how does that impact me as a homeowner? And page 3 and 4, we ran the impact on for a homeowner with the new 40,000 homestead exemption. Again, it went from 25,000 to 40,000. And this is our homestead where we actually live. You know, there are some people out there that have their home and then have 3 other rental properties. It doesn't impact those rental properties. It's just actually where you reside and call home. So on page 3, on row 4 and 5, that scenario, case A, 11,665,000, doesn't impact the homeowner. It's actually going to be less because there's no net tax rate increase. So again, 11,665,000, taxes are pretty much going to be the same or less. On case B, which is row 12 through 18, for case B is 20,120,000. The net tax rate increase of 6.75 cents. We had estimated home values from 100,000 to 250,000. And I'm just going to pick out 2 or 3 from each. A $100,000 home with a 40,000 exemption. The annual increase, on top of what you're currently paying, it will be an additional $40.52 a year, which is pretty much $3.38 a month. A $250,000 home value with a $40,000 exemption removed, we have it at $210,000. An additional $141.81 a year, which is $11.82 a month. So we go down to the third scenario, case C, for $25 million, and we have a net total tax rate increase of 11.9 cents. A $100,000 home valuation, it's going to be an increase on top of what you're currently paying, $71, and this is all on column I, $71.41 a year, which comes out to $5.95 a month. The $250,000 homestead home value, $250,000, we have an additional annual increase of roughly $250 more a year, which is $20.83 a month. Now we turn to page 4, the last 2 scenarios. Again, case D is for $28 million. The estimated net increase, total tax increase is 14.5 cents. The $100,000 home value, we have an annual increase of $87, which is $7.25 a month. The $250,000 home value, we have $304.50 a year, which is $25.37 a month. And then the last scenario is $32,935,000. We have a net tax rate increase of roughly 18.64 cents. In the $100,000 home valuation, we have an additional annual taxes paid of $111.86, which is $9.32 a month. In the last scenario is $250,000 home value. Additional taxes are $391.52, which is a monthly increase of $32.63. And again, this just assumes the recently passed $40,000 homestead exemption, not the proposed that they're discussing, 70 or 75. If whatever amount is approved won't impact, I believe, until next fiscal year, which begins September 1st, October 1st. So again, it's a lot of information, and I applaud the board, for putting this on the agenda, for discussing it, for inviting the community staff to bring in some ideas, suggestions, thoughts, whether they're for or against. I know everybody was welcome. All you're considering is calling a bond election. You're not approving to do the projects. You're not approving to enter into the debt. You're not approving the tax rate. All you're approving is allowing the voters to decide either early election or on May the 6th whether the referendum passes. Your bond counsel, if it is called, can guide you and tell you whether it's one proposition or multiple. We all know over the years, they have made it difficult for school districts. It's harder to pass bond elections. Cities, counties, school districts. Years ago, we remember one proposition. You could call bond election any time during the year, and you could put everything, $2 billion worth, in one proposition. Now they're saying if it's certain projects, they have to be stripped out and they have to be in a standalone proposition. So from calling it any time throughout the year, it's now twice a year, May and November, and there's discussions now that it kind of leaning maybe to November. But that discussion started last year, the year before. We don't know what's going to pass or what's not going to pass until the session's over with. Again, applaud the board, the community, the staff who participated. It's a lot of work. It's a difficult decision. But we all know over the last few years we wish we could have done something when rates were low. We talked about that earlier, Mr. Davis and I, a year ago. A year ago, rates were at, 15, 30-year, 2%, 3%, 3.5%. Now we're looking north of 4%, up there to 5%. But the flip side of that, the borrowing was cheap, but your investments weren't making a lot of money. I think Ms. Ramirez could tell you, Dr. Grandjean, your investments were at 0.25, 0.5%. Now your investments with the government pools and hopefully with the banks, local banks, you're at that 4% minimum or higher. And so you're making money on your investments, but the flip side of that, when you borrow, it's going to cost us a little more. So again, the rush to go out there and do a bond referendum and try to apply for permanent school fund bond insurance, if you don't get that insurance through the state, it's going to cost you more to get bond insurance, and it's going to cost you more on a higher interest rate. Receiving permanent school fund insurance at AAA, it's a safety net that if you can't make a bond payment, the state will kick in and help you out. It bumps up your bond rating to AAA, and it gives you a lower interest rate in the market when you do go out there and sell your bonds, as opposed to private bond insurance. We know there's no private bond insurance that's going to get you to AAA. But it will bump up your current bond rating up several steps, but not to that AAA for $1,500. So again, I know a lot of information, and I apologize if I went too fast. But please, if there's any questions from the board, staff.
Okay, we kind of know what we're looking at now anyway. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am, Mr. Bell. I appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me to present. Thank you.
I think now we need to discuss what we think we can do. What is the board's feeling on first, whether we do a May or November?
How would the city's bond affect us with, the perception? Because I know that's kind of controversial right now. So will that,
Y'all make sure you have your...
yeah, so would that make it more of a negative effect for our bond if we go out in May versus November? That's my concern.
I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's for sure a consideration.
And what if their bond fails and they go November anyway? Again, they can
Yeah.
roll to November anyway, so there's no, if they don't pass it now, put it on their ballot again for November, and then we're right back where we started.
What percentage of people voted for our bond last time?
Oh, my goodness. Shannon, do you remember?
More than 600 votes,
600?
maybe.
Okay.
I was new to the board at the time, and the conversation that I remember at that time was that what could we have done better to communicate what the bond was going to pay for. And I talked to some individuals at some other school districts, and they were just reminding Renee, why are the reasons that bonds don't pass? And they don't pass because, not because all of us don't agree that we need these changes. I think everybody, I think once you see the pictures and you hear about the facility improvements, we all agree. But it's because people don't, number one, understand where the money's going, or number two, understand the impact to their individual taxes. And when I first got on the board, we said, okay, this next time, let's have a huge marketing campaign. Like, I think we tried previously, but in my mind, May's rushed. In my mind, if you're going to November, think about all of the year-end activities that we have coming up. And if we really developed good marketing materials, the opportunities we have to be there, to hand things out, to show videos, you know, graduations, end of year award ceremonies, things where we have parents, social media, having someone going around videoing, let me show you this, let me show you what it looks like now and how it's going to be improved, highlighting some of the people who are on the facilities committee and letting them speak to it. Because I worry, we could always go out and then go back out again in November, but does that make us look organized and thoughtful about it? Or does it, you know, it feels like a knee-jerk reaction? I talked today to the person who's over the bond programs for the city of San Antonio, and I said, tell me, how much time does it take to educate? We're having a meeting tonight to talk about whether to put a bond on the ballot. He was like, for May? Like, was flabbergasted that would be a thought, because he was like, this is something I should have been talking about in the fall. And I said, the facilities committee they were doing so much work, and I just don't want their work to fall flat on its face, because we don't pick up that torch and do the additional work that needs to be done.
What are the rules for advertising a bond? Do you have to do it after it's called, or can you do it before? Like, can we start now and go advertise for it if we do it in November? Or is it a certain time frame that you only have to advertise for the bond?
Good question. My name is Rose Koneski. I'm with McCall, Parkinson, Horton, which is your bond counsel. I don't actually like the words advertising and marketing because we can't spend any public resources on advocating. Right. What I like to say is we're educating.
Inform the public of what
Yeah.
they want to do. Yeah.
Exactly. There's not a start window. You can start even before you're calling the election, just to let your community know you're ramping up, you're looking at this, you're investigating. Once you do order the election is when the curtain comes down, and you have to be extra careful about how you do that communication. Mm-hmm. For example, at this point in time, you haven't ordered an election. You can actually say, we need these safety improvements. Remember Uvalde. Once you order the election, the word need comes off the table. And you'll have to say, just, this is what we've allocated, or this is what we're projecting, is so many dollars for safety and security improvements.
So the buildup can start informing the public of what we're planning on, of what's going to be included in the bond can start today, even though we don't if we do it in May or November.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what she said. We actually have more leeway on the type of education we do now versus if we call the election, our hands are going to be tied a little bit more about what we can say about it.
Right, because right now you're going to be educating people, but you can use terms that you can't use later. You also have to keep in mind how you're going to be impacting your community if you say, we're planning on doing this, and then you don't do it. So there are pros and cons to however you decide to do it. There are districts that haven't invested a lot of time up until the point in which they order the election. It's typically seen as the role of the long-range planning or facilities planning committee, that the community has had input through that process.
After we would call for a bond election, the board itself is not able to use the words we need or whatever, but other people, like our committee that was working, they would be able to.
Yes, and let me put a little fine point on that. The board as a unit cannot do that. So when you're sitting here on the dais as a unit, you can't advocate for. But once you break up and you go out into the community, you can definitely say, you need this, and you express yourself as you normally would.
Okay, that's what I
Only the
thought.
superintendent's not allowed to do that, though.
Sorry, Dr. Grant.
Right.
Most people can't differentiate when the superintendent has taken off his superintendent hat. And so out of an abundance of caution, we always say, you should always remain factual, because people will talk to you at the grocery store and the gas station and just assume you're wearing your superintendent hat.
Sure.
And I know that we've discussed this, but I would like to hear you say it. We cannot actually say in the bond language in any way that we have saved this money by paying off these bonds, and so we have 9 million or 11 million that's not going to raise your taxes, so that's why we're going out for X number of dollars. You can't really say that. We can tell people that, right?
That's
But
right.
it can't be in the bond language.
There's sometimes a big gulf between your educational materials and your ballot language. And right now, school districts are laboring under a very difficult situation that no other local government has to face at this time. And that is that there's a second sentence that's on your ballot that says this is a property tax increase. Whether you intend to increase the
It has
rate
to be in all caps.
or not. There are some jurisdictions that say that. I have done it in lowercase, if that makes a difference to you.
I mean, that's super frustrating, right?
Yes.
That there's a state law that says that we have to say that even if that's in conflict with what we're trying to educate on.
That's true, I agree. It's a huge burden that was placed there, I think purposely. But it's not exactly false, because even if you don't increase your tax rate, property values in the area are going up. And people pay their tax bill. They don't pay their tax rate.
That's right.
I mean, I just think that's another consideration too, is all of us, all of our home values went up, everybody's home, you know.
An extreme amount.
An extreme amount, you know. Yeah, it's unfortunate for us that this is a time when we're looking at this, because it's on everybody's mind.
Thank you. We can't really take a straw vote on this, but
So is the bond insurance for the 1,500 available for May and November, or just May?
And I think this is probably a good question for both Rose and I. What we're hearing, we don't know when they're going to fix the ceiling. We know they added more capacity, so we don't know when that's going to get taken up. So they actually didn't say it's going to be available till this day. They're just saying we've now released the ceiling, have more capacity, so the people that had prior bond elections can apply. And so we're kind of hoping that there will be something there for anybody that calls a May election. So again, we don't know.
It's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed.
But it's available.
But currently it's available.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
Both
currently.
May and November currently is fine.
We don't know who's going to be going in May and how much of that is going to pass, and then who's going to apply for it. Yeah, but they're also telling other school districts that didn't apply from November to reapply, or either if they were declined to reapply. But we know for sure Austin ISD did apply, was declined, but we haven't heard if they've been accepted or not.
So there's two things in play there. The capacity was created by a reduction in a reserve policy, which is good for districts who are applying. The cap is actually a fixture of federal tax law, and there is currently legislation at the national level to solve this problem in Texas. We just can't tell you if it's going to pass or when it will pass.
It took 2009, about just under a year to get it resolved. For 9 months, they did not insure any bonds. The scenarios back then were if you need to sell your bonds, you would have to sell them and get private bond insurance, or wait until they fix the formula and then reapply 9 months or almost a year later. So it was either you had rate exposure, project cost exposure. If you waited, or if you decided to move forward, you just took the rates that were in place, but you purchased private bond insurance at that time.
What were the conversations with the committee? Did they feel confident that they thought if we went out in May, they felt confident that they thought their friends and families were going to vote for this?
So we have some of them here. One of the conversations that we had was, I even confronted, and said, hey, do we feel more confident in November because of the city election? We started looking at some of the stuff that they had put out, and that meeting went extremely powerful towards coming and talking to you guys and pushing for a May election. They were like, we think we can do this right now. We need to do this right now. If not, we come back in and we reevaluate. One of the things that one of the helpers that was facilitating the committee with us, he actually said, I don't know if he would speak to it again, he said, I've very rarely seen a group come together this fast or this cohesively. Usually there's a lot of no this, no that, and the pieces that our committee put together matched nearly identical to the professional survey that we had gotten for our facilities committee. So
That's what we had already looked.
we have some here. I know
Would anybody from that
Misty's
committee want to
here.
speak?
We had the same thoughts in the initial discussion of like, okay, are we pushing too early on time to educate the public? And then as we started talking and discussing as a group, I felt like everybody kind of stepped up and was like, well, if we need to be in games, we'll open up here. And we had the idea of like opening up this, we have any type of games here, we can have maps and drawings and layout of budgets of what that would look like, was how calculate your taxes, what will that increase look like. We were all ready and willing to help however we needed, and we all felt like it was important to let the public see pictures, videos, what we were shooting for. And I think everybody in the committee was ready to raise their hand to help be at these events and functions to help educate the public.
Would you have the capacity?
Would you have the capacity to do something like individualized mail outs that told people how it would affect you based on your current value and sharing it?
if it was legal, we for sure.
It's just
We-
educating. If it's not persuading, it's just giving the
Education.
facts.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And you can tailor your arguments to your audience. It is possible for you to get your voting list, for example, from the county. You can find out which of your employees who live within the district are not even registered to vote, and you can encourage them to get registered. You can't encourage them how to vote one way or another once the bond is ordered, but it really does help to be able to identify who would be your supporters, who traditionally has voted, and for board members to individually reach out and speak to those people, encouraging them to come vote. It's also possible, depending on your contracting partner, which I believe is the city, to maybe provide an early voting location on campus or at the administration building. Those are things you can only do at a May election. In November, your hands will be tied in terms of locations for both election day and early voting, because in November, we're stuck with using county polling locations. So that's a mechanical difference that many school districts prefer May elections, not just because they're traditionally considered a local election, because it may offer them more flexibility in polling locations, and it may be a cheaper election for them as well.
Yes, it is.
If I may add, it's a good question as far as what could be provided on, say, a bond election brochure. And that's something both Rose and I, we don't put these together, but I normally see 99.9% of the time, you have either a marketing firm, but majority of the time it's the architect firm. They have a marketing department within the firm that does all the brochures, the nice colors, everything, and has gone through years of experience. So they know what to put, but they'll call us, they'll call Rose and ask, and they'll ask us for the home impact scenario. Okay, give us that little graph, tell us what it is, send it to us, and they'll cut and paste it in the brochure. They'll send it to Rose and have Rose review from top to bottom, back and forth. Does everything look good legally? Did we say something out of line, or is Robert's numbers correct, or what the staff provided us correct? So again, we provide information both on the legal and the financial to the architect firms that put that marketing brochure together to hand out at games or at PTA functions or Kiwanis, Knights of Columbus, wherever you're going to hold these kind of town hall meetings at, or even mail-outs. Yeah.
I guess one other question I might ask Casey. Probably isn't something that you really want to answer, but do you have any idea of what the cost, the difference would be if it was held off for 6 months?
You bet. Good evening. I'm Casey Slidge, Slidge Engineering, representing Region 13 Service Center. So if I understand the question right, what might the cost implications be from a project standpoint if you wait? So you heard Robert mention earlier inflation, and I'm quite familiar with the cost escalation in the last few years. My opinion would be strongly that cost is not going to go down for November. I don't know that it will ever go down again in Texas. When you're blessed with all this work and all these jobs and everyone moving to the state, that just keeps the construction economy moving, but that means the cost goes up. So it's going to be up there. I would tell you that the way I would plan for that, and really the way we've been planning for that with your facility committee and with your strategic facility plan, years ago we might look at a 4 or 5% cost escalation per year for construction, but right now 10 or 12% is really the minimum you should look at a cost escalation level. That'd be my advice. We don't have a crystal ball, of course, and there's many moving parts and factors in that, but I would confidently tell you 10% is roughly the number I would be looking at for a cost increase. I'm not saying between May and November exactly, I would just say annually. So if that helps you a little bit think about it, it might be 7 or 8%, it might be 10 or 12%, but it's something in a window like that, most likely. I would not be surprised if it landed in that window. So whatever happens with the insurance that you may or may not buy, keep that amount relative to construction inflation. Construction inflation is probably by far a much bigger cost than these other items, sadly.
Okay. Do y'all have any other questions of him about a mayor? Do you know what you want to do?
I think we should go up to May just because we're going to lose money, we do wait. And as far as educating the public, I mean, you're looking at the people who showed up to our meetings starting in January. I mean, we could always go out, like you said, to the Little League games and educate them there, but, you're looking at the people here that are going to push for it.
That is one thing that I see as a plus. I would really take advantage of the enthusiasm of that committee that we have right now. It's just a gamble any way we do it. I personally am not sure how the cities will affect us. I think they're so confused over there, don't quote me on that, that they're not even sure, and it did not pass, even calling for the bond with a strong majority. It was a 3-2 vote, and hopefully we are a little more united than that. But so why don't we go on ahead?
But
you want to say something?
I was just gonna sound with Henry on leaning towards the May just for the cost fact, and then a better chance of getting bond insurance too.
Yes.
That's a big one.
Do you want to, look at May right now and then start looking at what we think we can afford to go out for?
So is that all, so what are we, tonight we're doing, when we're going out for it and the amount?
Yes.
Okay.
We would have to state the amount of the bond that we don't necessarily have to say that we're gonna put this much in elementary and this much at the
Just the total amount
high
that we're
school.
gonna go out
But
for
we
bond.
need to know what we're kinda looking at. And those figures may change some, but we need to kinda know what we're looking at. As far as,
I would support May only because there's 6 of us and there's a lot more people on the facilities committee. And it's not my personal opinion. My personal opinion is we're handicapping ourselves, but I would never want to overrule the people who spent a lot of time and effort involved in this, who believe that they can market it.
Right.
So I feel like we have to go with what they're recommending.
At that meeting, I was able to sit on, and they were really gung-ho on getting it out there and making it happen.
Yeah.
It was-
You can't ask them to do the work and then not take their
It was
recommendation.
pretty impressive. I walked into that meeting thinking, okay, I got my brakes on for May. Walking into that meeting and then listening to everybody and doing that, it was pretty overwhelming what they wanted to happen in May.
If we can educate everybody, I think that's important. This was like a crash course for me. So I know there's a lot, it was, seriously. So I think education is key. And we have great people that look at it, so.
all right. Now, the big question, what size bond do you think we can go out for? We already know we have the 11.
Can that be separate from the, because that can get a bond, one bond?
As I understand, you cannot put an $11 million bond and say, this won't raise your taxes. And then put another proposition that says other thing, another amount, that this will raise your taxes. You
Right,
can't do
we're
that.
required to say this is a property tax increase regardless, but that's only on the ballot, which granted, some people will first hear about the election when they're in the voting booth. But in your educational materials, you can say whatever you want to explain the situation. I have seen districts call out the legislature and say, it's all their fault, it's stupid. I've seen some really outrageous things. But I've also seen some calmer explanation of, this is a legal requirement, that's why it's here. We're telling you, we're committing to you that we're not raising the tax rate.
But it can't be two
Right,
propositions.
okay.
But you could have an 11. I think what they're asking is the amount that would not cause a tax increase would be 11, we'll just call it $11 million. There can be an $11 million referendum.
Yeah.
Our
Yes.
proposition.
Different.
It can be separate. It just would require us to be able to tell everybody, this is
And specifically what that would go
right,
towards.
because
Yeah.
that's how you'd have to divide some of these things up. And not making a recommendation by any means, but it could be the early education childhood center is one, and however you wanted to do that.
So we're looking at these now, on the specifics yet about?
No, we can. Do you want to look at what the size of the bond that we think we can go out for first before you look at the items? Or do you think we need to do the items first?
Are they prioritized for us?
Mm-mm.
So did the committee, I know
They-
that we didn't see that, but did they prioritize them?
We didn't really have a number one.
No.
We didn't really have a 1 through 4. It was kind of piled into what the capacity would be, and then you leave that up to y'all.
They had brought their long list of 80 whatever thousand down to 40 and then down to 32, and that's what they brought to us. And all of those items have been advertised out there. So while we have looked at some of it and we may be able to bring some of that cost down by not doing some of these things or doing it with our own fund balance, it's still, the total amount will still be close to 30 if we went for everything. The one thing I think that we would need to state is that, and I think y'all know this, because the tennis courts are a recreational facility, they would have to be listed separately. Is that correct?
Yes, Ms. Pepper.
And the ADA and the stadium improvements would have to be listed separate
Correct.
if we decided to put that on a bond.
So this is my first time doing this, so if we say, is it up to a certain amount?
It is up to, so it's an authorization. It's the authority to issue up to whatever that
So it's
amount
not
is that you
32.
choose.
So if we say,
Yes.
32 and we come back and say, oh, we can do it for 28, that's
Exactly,
okay.
that's okay. It's not a pre-commitment that you are going to spend
just can't.
32.
It's just no more
You just
than.
can't
Can't
exceed that.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
But
And
that's what will be on the election thing, 32. If
Oh,
that's
so
what
we
we,
decide tonight will be on the
yes,
election.
whatever
So
we
can't-
decide
we
tonight.
can't change
But
that
we're-
number after tonight if we do proceed?
Right, if you decide to order the election tonight, I need for you to decide on the amount, the number of propositions, and the order in which they will appear. And hopefully you have the suggested ballot language for those 3 items. The complete list is 3 separate ballot propositions.
yes.
That's another, thank the legislature for making it harder on school districts to pass bond issues.
We may want to look at the items.
Yes. So if we back into it, we had discussed the ADA improvements and the track improvements would have to be a separate ballot, a separate proposition. We had talked about possibly funding that out of our fund balance rather than putting it on the bond. How do you feel about that?
The very bottom, with the
Yeah,
This
in
first
the,
page?
yeah, in the old one, it's,
It's at the bottom of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Because that's not included in that anymore.
Okay.
yeah, I'm looking at the old one, I'm not looking at the new one. So if we, yeah, if we didn't include that. Where'd the ad bond come from?
Oh, that was a long discussion.
Okay, the next thing, let's just take a few of them. The tennis courts, it would have to be on a separate proposition also. Are you okay with leaving the tennis courts on a separate proposition? I mean, basically, it's gonna be, do you want to spend $1,200,000 for tennis courts? Because that's the only other thing we have.
And that second page is probably
This one.
that's probably the best one.
Okay.
'Cause that
All
puts
right.
everything at 29.
I actually kind of appreciate that it's on a separate topic.
Yeah.
Because then the rest of the conversation doesn't go about, well, look how much money they're spending on
That's
tennis
right.
courts. You get to decide. for
Yeah.
this one.
And that's exactly why they're making you do that. People were combining their sports facilities in with their instructional facilities and so. Okay, there were some other items that we had looked at which would reduce the cost some, but basically the rest of it, if you take off, I mean, if you say you're gonna have $1.2 million, then we need to decide what else we're gonna do to come up to whatever figure you think we can work with. That's the reason I was looking at how much do you think we can work with, because that's gonna drive what we feel like we can do. I will say that Todd's original figures that he had given us without the early childhood center and the band hall, the new band hall, it was 10,494 or something like that, 92. So all of those other projects came in right at the 10 million, but that's having the band hall and the early childhood development be separate. As I mentioned to you earlier, we have also looked at some revisions that can be done in the elementary campus so that, because that's a large amount, 16 million for the elementary campus. And that's half of that, the total amount that we're looking at. And there were some items that we could change in that would make it a little bit different.
Ms. Pepper, if I may, I don't want to overly complicate things, but
Okay.
I will anyway. You mentioned the childhood center, the new early childhood center, and the new band hall. Those are both what we would consider general facilities. You could group those two and make them their own ballot proposition. And just like with the tennis courts, you could let your voters decide how much tax impact they want to take on by splitting them up in that way.
We had talked about that, we just weren't sure.
Yes, you can do that. You always could do that. You can choose to separate out anything you want to separate out. There's just now the new categories of things that you don't have a choice, you must separate out.
What is the negatives to having more propositions versus fewer?
The negatives are the more opportunities you give voters to say no, they might say no. So this is why typically when I work with the districts on how they want to order the propositions, they typically place the recreational items last, maybe the stadium last, because they figure, voters maybe are fatigued. By the time they get to the last one, they're going to say no just because. And so that's not a hard and fast rule. I have a district right now that I'm working with, cannot do its general facility renovation unless it moves its baseball and softball complex. So their first proposition is actually that athletic component. They need for that one to pass so that they can do their general facilities renovations. So there are strategic reasons why you might want to do things that you do.
On this elementary campus, is there any,
Anything we can cut.
did y'all look at it, specifically to see, like Carrie's saying, how much can you bring that down? Is it a couple $100,000 or is it? Because in the grand scheme of things, for
Duration
Want
or
to
some different options.
talk to Mr. Casey over there about that?
Like some different options.
Since that elementary campus is such a high number, is there any flexibility with it to make it a little more feasible?
Well, you have entire flexibility. You can do whatever you want or not do anything. But let me communicate what the Facilities Committee went through and the reason that ended up the way it did. There was a lot of thought. If you go back all the way to the Strategic Facilities Plan, and I appreciate you mentioning that, and this plan is really consistent with that, which is great. That's what we want to see. So we feel good about the project list. You would really at this point have to just strip something down or take something off of the project list. A couple of notable items at the elementary campus. There are some really core parts of that building project that make it so large that are really important, and it's going to be a vast difference for you. It'd be a serious, significant improvement. But there are two things in there that were talked about quite a bit. They weren't always in there originally for this first phase for the facilities plan. One of those things is there is a new gym in that number that's included in there. They call it a full-size gym. So it's spacious and provides that for you, for the kids, and for the staff. The second thing that it also has in it now, it's in that number, is a dining area or a dining room. This is not a kitchen, but is the seating area portion, the cafeteria portion, if you will. We call it the dining room. That is also in that number. We did talk with the committee a lot about one or the other, gym or dining room, or even combining those two. And those are certainly things that can be done. Our experience with combining those two from a practical operational standpoint, many districts do not have success with that. We've actually been to many districts that have done that and then wanted to change later. It's very difficult operationally. It's easy to build, but it's just a lot of work to do. Not taking that off the table But to give you just a couple of numbers, if you eliminate the dining room but still keep that gym, which would be large, you could use the other portions of it. So the dining room is about a $900,000 amount of an item total. So you could take that right off and plan. And keep in mind, these are budget numbers for your project. Doesn't mean we will or won't try to build them anyway. We just have to stay within that total. You know, so you might go for it. And when we come up with these cost numbers, it's a lot of work on our end to try to predict what it's going to cost 18 and 20 months from now when you're actually building this project. So that's also tough, and it takes a lot of foresight as well. So there's approximations throughout. But if you were to take $900,000 off, I would tell you that your expectation should be you would not have enough for the dining room and everything else on the list. Doesn't mean we won't try later, but something would have to reduce. Conversely, if you took the gymnasium away, it's about 2.4 million. It's a lot more square feet. It's a lot bigger.
The gym is 2.4.
Correct.
And it's a full-size gym?
It
Like-
is.
Like a competition gym?
Not like this gym.
The concept of the gym is that there's enough budget to build enough square feet that you could put a full-length basketball court, but not the spectator area, the seating area, or concession or locker rooms, none of that. It's that many square feet. It's about 8,000 square feet. Not that it would even necessarily be in that shape, but a lot of schools will do that when you design, so you can also have basketball in there or volleyball. You don't have to do that.
Is the thought to do that because they might be needing it for another one of the campuses? Because I don't know that we'd need that for the first through third grade.
The first and third graders themselves generally aren't playing full-length basketball. That's not why you do it. That's a very common size for an elementary gymnasium just for PE activities. You don't have to build it. There's not a rule to build it to that size. Generally what we find is that we're going to build almost that much square footage, well, let's go ahead and make it that shape. Or we're going to build that many square feet, and we'll say a square. If we make it a rectangle, you could also play basketball here as a fallback. You're not committing to any of that, of course. I'm just telling you our basis for that budget. You could also take some of that 8,000 square feet that we budgeted for that 2.4 million and dining in one end, PE in the other. You could put a dividing wall or a movable wall. I mean, you have all these options. Remember, it's just a budget. And I'm just trying to tell you what we think you'll get for that budget, best we can.
But these kids are required to have PE, right? So many hours
They
a
are.
day or whatever.
They are. That's correct.
I mean, we've been talking about a gym for the elementary for 10 years.
Yeah, I would. I mean, the gym is pretty important. I mean, there's no doubt.
And I'll speak for the facilities committee. They didn't fall on that because, hey, we want another gym in the district.
No.
The littlest kiddos that we have to walk across the street
Right.
to go to the intermediate to eat lunch and to do their PE. That was the approach that the committee was looking at.
I think both your gym and dining room really, I would argue the reason the committee really pushed those two items to go in this bond instead of maybe later when there's a newer campus built, which is a long-term future for the elementary, it relates back to safety. The kids are having to go outside. I think you're probably all aware of that. They'd have to cross the campus like they've been doing for a long time.
Point to all the parents of the elementary kids.
Yeah.
Safety and keep out of the way.
Right, and the committee understood that was 50% of the recommendation financially was elementary.
So the rest of it, the new offices and all of, I believe too that the new entryway, the drop off, the parking and all that really needs some changes too.
Right.
But for the office area itself, approximately, what is that? I mean, that section that you're going to build?
There's included in that number, this is not designed, of course, so included in that number is the concept of you also attacking traffic in a secure vestibule. Both of those things relate the same way, and that is by putting a new face and a new entry for all of those kids and those parents with those kids, where what division is, they would have their own driveway, their own parking, their own ingress, egress, their own secure vestibule to come into that building, not how they do it today. And to do that, you have to have some staff there. So there's a number of offices to go there. It's not all that many. I mean, we have the square footage. So it's essentially a whole new start. I mean, all that's significant though. This is not just a wing we're adding onto your current campus. This is a new face of a new portion of that campus. to get you all those reciprocal effects.
Questions?
Yeah, on the band hall and the Rock Box Center, I asked you last time about revamping the band hall that we have, and just,
Yes.
it wasn't feasible to remodel what we have as far as a band hall. I understand that. But what is the cost on the, making that space that we have that we're using for the band hall now? What is the cost on that? What are we gonna spend on that remodel for the Rock Box or whatever, the Black Box?
The Black Box.
Theater?
So the item in there for high school has, it's a new band hall and the many things that go with that. We're saying band hall, but there's office space, corridor space, there's practice rooms, ensemble rooms, there's a lot of square footage for that new band hall. And we did look a lot during the facilities plan and even later with the committee about, hey, can we just reuse this band hall? Certainly the answer could be yes, but what's the trade-off? We felt it was a really strong and fairly obvious maneuver. If we just renovated what you have, we were really going to be fighting uphill for that core space due to the nature of band halls and acoustics and the size of the space you need and the types of construction and all that. Back to your question, how much the money that we have in the budget allocated for the renovation to convert the current building into a black box classroom, which is what that is for theater practice and similar. It was under $1 million. I think it's about $700,000 we have. I would tell you that's a lot of money, but that's a fairly light renovation. We're not going to move a bunch of walls or things like that, or there's no big addition. It's try to use that space as is, which actually does work out quite well. That space is almost exactly right. If we were building a new black box, that's just about what we would build anyway. So that's why that seemed to work out.
Thank you.
Yep.
How big a band hall is it? It seems like it's a large amount, and I don't think anybody would disagree that we need some improvements in our band hall area.
Sorry, I had to get my resources. I'm getting told to remember it all. So the total amount of the project that we have listed in the band hall and other improvements, it's 12,480 square feet was our basis to come up with this budget. And again, that's a large band hall. That's about 4,000 square feet of it. 2 ensemble rooms, 5 practice rooms, restrooms, staff restroom, offices, storage, music library, mechanical space, allowance for all those mechanical items. That in circulation to get around corridors. So it's about 10,000 square foot of classroom and usable space, another 2,000 square feet of estimated circulation space for corridors and entries and whatnot. It's not designed yet. Getting us just over 12,000 square feet. That was our basis. And that's pretty common. I mean, school this size and where you're headed, that we think that's pretty good. But also significant.
Said a neighbor of ours nearly built one identical to what you guys had planned, so
That's correct. Yes, and we just bid it out within the last year.
And this will accommodate the high school and the middle school.
Oh, yes,
So
correct. It'll be like the concept behind the elementary. This is kind of a game-changing facility for extended early years.
Anybody else have questions?
I know that you guys mentioned pros and cons as far as elections and things that you've seen for referendums. If we were to give the people a choice on the band hall, similar to the tennis courts, but the renovation of the office space to make our high school entryway more secure, you know how we're moving that? Because I mean, right now you can walk around for a day and not really figure out where the office is. Right. So if that high school portion, the renovation in the classrooms and the entryways were to stay in our general facilities piece, but the band hall was pulled out to give somebody an opportunity, how do you see those numbers separate?
If you give me a
It's
minute,
here.
I can get to it.
Right. Okay.
It's here,
Because we talked about that.
Yeah.
to renovate the downstairs.
Okay, right. So the high school
1.8.
renovation was like 1.85 something.
And the band hall and the black box was 7.68.
Thank you, Ms. Pepper. That was excellent.
In case you just have
If we pass that $11 million bond, no tax increase for us. And then the 20 million is gonna go up a little bit, but does that include the 11 million?
definitely.
Yes.
Yes, it's $9 million.
Dude,
This is $9 million.
You just got to decide on the propositions, what those projects.
We don't necessarily have to decide tonight that we're gonna allot so much to whatever, because we may have to do some work to trim some of this. If, let's just say we decide on a 25 million, you know, we know we can't do all the 32, so we're gonna have to trim some somewhere. But when we do call the bond, we have to say whether we're going to, you know, put all of it up in one proposition or whether we're gonna split it out and things like that. That's why I kept coming back saying we've got to look at how much we think we can call.
How the language of the bond be like, can you do something like there's a header and it says school safety and security, this much money, band hall, this much, I mean, can you be creative in kind of your headers?
I think it's a brochure you can.
I actually haven't done headers a lot because it's an area of the law that doesn't speak to whether you can have a header, but I have done them. City of San Antonio is notorious, and of course, you know, it has a very large bonding capacity and it goes out for big numbers. So by law, we're required to say entity name, so it would be the Devine Independent School District, Proposition A. And then by a header, sometimes I've put in parentheses next to that, safety and security. City of San Antonio example, streets and drainage, animal control. Some little, like 1 or 2 word phrase to help people understand what you're asking them to vote on. But this is where I think the ballot language is really important. And as an example, I provided for your Proposition A, presuming you would order it, presuming you would put general facilities first. By law, we're required to say the issuance of X dollars of bonds by the Devine Independent School District for school facilities. And here's where I got creative. With priority given to district-wide renovations and safety and security at the elementary and intermediate campuses. And the levying of a tax and payment thereof, that's a legal requirement that we assess the tax. And then, of course, the final statement, this is a property tax increase. You could say very broadly for school facilities and leave it at that. That's permissible. What we're finding, though, is that with the change in the law, that more specificity is helpful. You don't want to be so specific that you've locked yourself in, but you do want to give the public a little bit of information, particularly for those people who haven't gotten educated before they landed up voting.
All that other language is the only soft language in that doesn't go, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a tax, it's a tax.
Yeah.
But it feels like people would be less likely to vote against something that included the words safety and security.
Yes.
Right, which is why even
I like
for,
what you wrote.
even for your stadium proposition, you can say the issuance of X dollars of bonds by the school district for stadium facilities. This is a property tax increase. But in your case, I wanted to be more informative, so I suggested for updating school stadium facilities, including ADA compliance and track improvements. Because again, I think it's important that part of these upgrades are for legal compliance. And they're things we should all really care about.
The only issue that I would have with that language, that first language on the proposition, is that if it included, the band hall and, everything, let's just say, that if, since it does not mention the middle school or the high school, somebody might look at it that does not know and not might say, they don't say anything about a band hall, or they don't say anything about improvements at the high school. So I would think it would either need to be broad enough to include all campuses and not say that, and we just educate them that this does include.
Was it, what you read, was that intended to include the band hall and everything?
Yes,
Yes.
the very first one.
And the band hall is really for high school and middle school, not just high school.
That's right.
So that could be misleading too, but it's just.
But see, by saying, she's saying given priority to the elementary and intermediate, but.
More specifically to renovations and safety and security.
Yeah.
Safety and security are
The big thing.
are big things right
Mhm.
now, and so I do encourage those districts that have dollars programmed for safety and security to say that in some fashion.
And the improvements that we're doing at the high school is a lot for security and safety, because we're trying to move those offices down and take care of, they're upstairs. And so we're trying to move them down so that people can enter into an area that's secure,
That's
rather
good to know
than
that.
wandering around trying to find where the office is.
And that was a part of the story that I didn't realize. So I think you could say district-wide renovations and safety and security, period. Because I didn't realize that that was the rationale for the high school.
Does anybody out there want to say how much you think that you could afford your taxes to go up? I mean, everybody knows what's happened with our values on our property.
I'll say
Okay.
so there's, after property taxes all day long today, so there's rules for it. But when I was sitting and looking at this list in the committee, it was like, well, what would we take out? I mean, and Coach Eads, like we guys said before, Coach Eads had made a great point, like, in the list, it's gonna touch every single one of our students in our district right now. Every single one is gonna get touched by something in there. And so for me, of course, I have property that's not homesteaded, so it's gonna go up even more. But what would I cut? Even the tennis courts, when you start going through the numbers of what those line items, how many kids are affected that, how many kids are in our tennis program, which is completely eye-opening to me, because I don't have kids in that program. It's amazing how many kids use it, and more could even use it, but they don't have an option to, because there's not room for it. Band is the same way. From 6th grade to seniors in high school, go into that band hall. Is it expensive? Yes, but how can you take it out when that many lives are touched on a daily basis through that program? And all of our programs are so successful with what we have. That was the other thing, the tennis program, extremely successful. Our band's always been successful. So it's very dedicated programs that we have, staff, our students, our parents that support it. So what line item do you cut? Which is why we were like, at the end of the conversation, we're just taking it all to the board, because we didn't want to make that decision to cut something out.
And I love with the idea of educating, being able to say, like, feature different programs and go, there's something in it for every kid benefits, but if you go out for the whole amount, are we cut, is it gonna fail because it's the whole amount?
Yeah.
But then where you cut that amount.
And that's,
The numbers were very important for me as a mom and a member of the community. I wanted to know how many kids go through that program to justify the cost.
and that's been the biggest problem that we have looking at this, is that we know that all this is needed. But for the general taxpayer out there to see that we are asking them for a $32 million bond that's going to impact their taxes at a time when their property values have gone up so much. And we have other entities out there that are also asking for increase in taxes. It's just a lot for us to think. We would like to be able to think we could go out and it would pass, and it's really gonna take the education and getting people registered and out there to vote. I mean, you can educate them, but if you don't get them to the polls, it's not gonna help you, you know, and that's one of our biggest things, is to get the people out to the polls. I don't know, how do y'all, I mean, you gotta tell me how you feel, guys.
Well, we haven't even talked about the special ed building upgrades. I have concerns about that old building.
Yeah.
And,
We have talked about there's $2 million to renovate the old special ed building, and we've talked about that a lot, and I think that the board feels that something needs to be done for that special ed building. We're not sure that it needs to be renovated. Might need to be demolished, but anyway. But, and we can put something in, and the language can be that we will replace, renovate, you know, whatever, you know, to give us some leeway and get some figures on what it would be to replace or to bring something else in to put them in
do you
instead
have
of.
any estimates on that?
Sure. So the $2 million that's in there, the change for the renovation, is a really high renovation amount, more than a typical, because of the building, and it was gonna be a heavy renovation. Normally, I'd be pushing you to stick with renovation. It's such a good value, but in this case, your renovation is really approaching new replacement value. So our thinking was you can't go lower. It's new, it's still new. It's going to still cost more, but we could increase that number, I think, a reasonable amount, and have a budget to try and do. Again, you could try to renovate. Maybe it's a combination or something later. I would tell you, standing up here, because we looked at this today, essentially, instead of the 2.0 in the change we had, if it was in the 2.5 range, I think you're getting right to a new replacement. So.
And that's for about how many square feet?
I have it.
'Cause I think we had talked about that maybe they have 4,000 now, maybe. Do you know, Ms. Dykstra, what you have over there? How many square feet you have? Yeah, it's small.
The numbers no.
Okay.
And our program deals with 400 to 600 of our students in just like the federal program.
There was a renovation of 4,000 square feet and an addition of 1,500 square feet in the $2 million number.
So they would.
5,500.
55.
I feel like this is probably a dumb question, but are there any stats out there that talk about size of the school district and size of bond and pass rate? Like, is there a sweet spot?
Robert, you had mentioned to me that of all of those schools that went out last year, there were about 70% that passed. Can you tell us if there was any kind of ratio between the size and the amounts that they went out for?
No, ma'am. We really, the only thing we could tell is, I think, Rose, correct me if I'm wrong, since the legislature started making it harder to pass bond elections in 2019 or so, the passing rate has come down. And it has, for us as financial advisors of bond councils, we don't think it really has anything to do with the size or the timing. It's just now stripping it out from one proposition and making it cafeteria style, like a menu style. Like what Rose said, the more propositions, the more opportunity you have to say no. So yeah.
Fewer are more likely to pass.
Right. And again, we don't think it's due to the dollar amount. I have had, and I think Rose could tell you, I think we all could tell you, where There have been bond elections, and I've had clients say to the board, to the super, put athletics and it will pass. I've had the flip side. Put academics, no athletics, and it will pass. So there's no rhyme or reason. It's just getting down to the committee, to the education, informing, the public, and then having them make a sound decision on the election day. But there, to us as consultants, it's just how difficult it's been to pass bond elections, because now you're having to strip it out from one proposition to numerous. And the success rate has slowly gone down.
And Region 13 kind of studies that a little bit, right?
We do. 70% is pretty good though, Rob.
For the state.
Yeah, you guys are gloom and doom up here. I was going to wait for you to pull my string, but I'm going to throw this opinion at you anyways. We've helped a lot of districts exactly this size. I live in a district this size. I've done it on the personal side, and yes, Region 13, we track them all as well. Robert had great comments. That's all correct. Just a couple things, and I'm not trying to encourage you or push this board at all. You guys, I want you to feel comfortable in your decision, but I want to share some things that we've picked up over the years. These are my opinions. And I'm going to think about more than one occasion where we've been in a district, they've called a bond, it failed, and they went back out and it changed, and what we learned. Every district's different, right? As soon as I say this, it'll probably be the opposite for you. But if you're laboring over the difference in 28 million, 25, 35, 40, 45, it doesn't matter. Education is key, regardless of the amount. Any bond election is more tax money than not having a bond election, period. Even if it's not a tax increase, well, the taxes could have gone down. So people will pick up on that. They know that. Nobody wants to pay taxes. This just gets down to, have you thought it out? Do they trust this board and the community? This is my advice to you. That's a pass-fail vote. Do we trust this board? And that's a lot of it. Can you get them to actually vote? Voter apathy is really high. That's a huge part of the education process. That's where your committee is going to come in. I would just say, I don't know that you have to get too hung up on the minutia of the amount. And yes, it's all important. But I've heard this board say several times, we want all these things. And I've heard the committee say, we don't know what to cut. I'm just saying, I don't know that it will affect your vote. I don't think it will affect your vote at all. I mean, you're either going to get support or you're not going to get support, because everything, the $40 million list is a really well thought out, needed list. It's not a flamboyant list, okay? They already took it down to 32.9. I do like some of the things you were talking about to go down just a little bit more. I think some of those smaller projects make sense. They confuse the ballot, so I applaud that. But again, I don't know that I would encourage you to be too hung up on that being the difference. I don't think that changes the voter's mind too much, if that helps.
I think that's really helpful. I think that was in my mind right now, especially if it's a larger amount. Once people realize it's a larger amount than we went out for bond last time, the difference between 25 million, 32 million, I mean, to the average person, it's just a lot of money anyway, right? If we went out for the whole thing, right? And I think if it passed, that'd be amazing. If it didn't, and you wanted to go back out, then I think the cool thing that you could do is then you've broken down these projects and went, okay, community, you said you weren't going for it with everything. Now we're going to survey all the parents, at least the people that we have contact with, and go, which ones would you have taken out? How do we drill this down? Because we thought we identified everything that was the most important for everyone, but we didn't. So now what do? So you have at least you have an actionable plan if it doesn't pass.
And that's what we talked about. I don't know when we talked about that, but we did talk about that. If it didn't go through, you could always do that. But I think we should ask for the 30 million, but I've been doing some numbers over here on the side and conversations that he and I have had. I think we could squeak by with the 28 and get pretty much the majority of what we're looking at here with 28. I know we can do it for 30. But that's my two numbers that I think we should go out for.
Well, we've already identified some things that we were going to pull off. I think that y'all have decided that we would do the ADA stuff separate, right? Okay. So that's 600,000 to pull off, and that's a small amount when you're looking at 32, but, and then, you know, the tennis courts are gonna be separate, so that's in this figure, this 32, but the original one would be listed could be listed as 28 or 30, and then the 12 for the tennis courts. I mean, the 1.2, sorry. We also looked at the restrooms at the intermediate, that those were gonna be done in-house. So that's another, you know, 450,000. And if we decided to do something with the early childhood thing and do the gym and the dining hall together, you know, so we're getting close to bringing it down to at least 30 or maybe
That
28.
new one,
This
new one took some of that stuff out.
Okay.
So that new one took out the,
And that's at the 31, right?
yes.
Okay. So the new one that he gave us it shows the 31.4.
And it has that in it, and when you flip the page,
Yeah.
if we didn't have that,
But
but,
I don't know if we should take that out.
right, well, that number probably, if it would be new facilities,
Yeah.
that is not, new sped building is not 2 million, it's 2.5.
2.5, yes.
Okay. So this number would probably be 31,980, something.
So we're leaning towards page one.
So are you thinking to say 28 plus the 1.2 for tennis or 30?
The 30 and the 1.2. Everything is recommended.
So it would be 32.
It would be 30 on the one proposition and the 1.2 for tennis courts. Two propositions.
If it helps, if we change the sped building to 2.5 million, then my Prop 1 list becomes 30,740,000. Then the 1.2 makes it 31,940.
But if we said 30 and can trim just a little bit
You certainly can.
here and there.
I'm just sharing the math.
Because I know we talked about the showers at the the middle school, that we didn't need them. But somebody else here says that her son does shower. And right now they're holding up towels to protect each other while they shower.
So in that first number, we did remove the budget amount that was allocated for all the plumbing that showers and restrooms require.
And the first number.
In the 30,
In the 30,
280.
okay.
this one.
But again, well, there may be other places
But,
that,
yeah,
there may
right,
be other
right. We
places
still
that
try
we
to do it, maybe
can deal
we
with
try.
it. So, okay, let me hear your thoughts. Is that what y'all are thinking, that we need to just go for it? Just,
I'm the same way. I think we should go for it all. I was just saying, like, if you wanted the minimum, that's what I was looking at. But I think we should not go for it. I think we should call for the election
I know
for the 30 and the 1.2.
when you look at how much it's gonna increase your taxes, with the new property values, there's probably not anybody that has a $100,000 home anymore. You know, there probably isn't one out there. So if you go with even just a $200,000 home, that's almost $300 annual increase. Well, that's a 32. It would be halfway between that and the 28. So,
But it's less than $100 difference between
yeah,
tearing it down and the amount we're talking about
Yeah.
tearing it down and going all
that's
the way.
right.
That's why I think once you get that high, they're gonna say yes or no, regardless of which number it is.
And you're right, we can, we would hope it's gonna pass, and it's gonna be up to us to educate people and get the voters out to vote.
The more you leave in, the more you can make the argument that it touches every kid.
Yeah. And if by chance it didn't, then we put it back in the voters' hands and say, okay, what would you have?
Then we may have have to break it down into more proposition, yeah,
And maybe we could even do
10
that in November if we
propositions
needed to, so.
yeah.
Okay, Ms. Bond Counsel.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we're gonna need some, well, the language for the motion
It's right here.
we have, but we have one proposition and proposition B, just A and B, right?
Right, because I heard that you're taking out the stadium proposition.
Right, which would be the 1.2, so that would be proposition B, right?
Right.
And then the proposition A is for the 30 million.
Proposition is A for 30,280,000, proposition B is the 1.2 million.
Do we want to do two, or we want to do a round amount, just the 30? I mean,
So Proposition A would be 30 and Proposition B 1.2?
that's what I'm asking, is that what y'all
Yeah,
think?
that's what I'm saying. So, yeah.
Does the difference in that 700,000, say it passes, does that now, because the last thing we want to do is make a promise that we can't deliver.
Is that $280,000 a deal breaker?
740,000, right?
What's the
Why are you saying 740?
Because it's 30,740,000. If, well, because that's, so instead of a renovation of the SPED building, I think in the discussion that you guys were talking about, a new building, new construction was gonna be 2.5 and not 2.0. Am I talking right?
You're saying it correct if that's
Okay.
what you want to change it to.
And then that changes that 30,280,000 to 30,740,000 or 750,080,000, whatever. So, I mean, and that may be a contingency that 700,000 doesn't matter, but
But we were
when you
saying
talk
that
about
there's,
trust, you don't want to say, this is what we're gonna do, and then 2 years into construction or May of 2025, we're like, we got a problem.
but that is
I don't
also
want to be a part of that problem.
where she's saying not to be so specific.
Okay.
in the-
Because it could be renovation, it could be listed as.
But and not the language so much. I'm just saying the number.
Educating, we go, it's gonna pay for this, and this, and we've shorted in.
You,
even
if
$500,000.
you're saying you'd call it for 30 million, I understand that it's a round number, but does 30 million 750,000, does that put us in a bind because of that's $750,000 that?
From an expectation standpoint for after tonight, if you move forward, if you're gonna reduce the amount, I don't know right now, but we'll have to reduce the expectation
Okay.
of something, and we can do that.
So are you saying that if we did whatever we're asking, that we would need to do 30,750,000?
Our budget allocation suggestion would be, if you wanna do a new SPED building as our goal, let's increase it to 2.5 million, the 2.0. Therefore, the total becomes 30,740,000 even for that top list. Like Dr. Grange said.
740. We could make it 750.
I like that, you're going the right way now.
Okay, what's your pleasure on that then? 31? Are y'all, how about, she was recommending 31 million instead of the 30, or this 3750?
The total is still 32 something.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we said earlier, it's either 30 million or 31. If you're not gonna vote for 30, you're not gonna vote for 31. If you're gonna vote for 30, you're gonna vote for 31.
So we just read this as a motion? Is this a motion?
That's what we need to do.
Are we good?
I mean, as I understand, right? We need to read into the motion, this motion, in order to call for a bond.
Yes, you need to fill in the amount, and then I do want to revisit the exact wording for both of them to make sure you're comfortable with.
Okay. So we need the motion first?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody ready for that motion?
Madam President, I move that the board adopt an order calling a bond election to be held by the Devine Independent School District with Proposition A in the amount of $31 million and Proposition B in the amount of $1.2 million.
Do I have a second? Okay, I have a motion by Chris and a second by Henry that we call for an order calling for a bond with two propositions, one in the amount of 31 million and the other in the amount of 1,200,000. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, thank you for being united on that. That passes 6-0. Okay,
So I have Proposition A as the issuance of $31 million of bonds by the Devine Independent School District for school facilities with priority given to district-wide renovations and safety and security and the levying of a tax and payment thereof. This is a property tax increase.
is that all y'all want to say? Don't want to mention anything else?
We don't need to use the words with priority given to. We could always say the word including, which is actually not a term of exclusion. So for lawyers, including means it's these items plus other things.
Priority.
Priority?
Can you read it again,
Yes, sir.
please?
The issuance of $31 million of bonds by the Devine Independent School District for school facilities with priority given to district-wide renovations and safety and security and the levying of a tax and payment thereof. This is a property tax increase.
Safety and security. First.
I thought it was first.
Oh,
You read the priority given to renovations?
District-wide renovations and safety and security.
could you just, can you swap those? Can you
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
give it a safety and
Swap
security?
and save
Yep.
safety and
And
security
swap
first.
renovations.
I would like them to hear that first.
Okay.
To do that.
So do you want district-wide to include renovations or just to say
Let's-
safety and security and
We
district-wide
talked about that.
renovations?
District-wide renovations, yeah.
Okay.
And again, we're not saying to include a band hall or anything like that. That would be in the education.
Right.
Part of
And
it.
those educational materials are not what the lawyers call the contract with the voters. So for legal purposes, what's in this document that you're approving tonight is what voters should expect. But Dr. Grandjean is 100% correct. There are expectation levels arising from those educational materials. So you do want to, as a practical matter, try to accomplish all of those projects on the list. Sometimes, and you'll hear me say this throughout the election process, there might be a legal answer, but it's not always the most practical or political reason. Okay, so for your Proposition B, I have the issuance of $1.2 million of bonds by the Devine Independent School District for new school tennis courts and the levying of a tax and payment thereof. This is a property tax increase.
Okay, that was simple.
Pretty straightforward on that one.
Okay,
Okay? Thank you.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank
Do,
you.
now, do we have to do anything with him as far as the number that,
With you?
So I've got the number here, she'll send us the documents, and then we're gonna plug in the potential interest rates and the impact associated to that. So we probably have that by Friday morning.
so one of the things, okay, that makes sense.
So when can we expect to see from you a communication plan? Like, what are the marketing pieces gonna be? What is the rollout of that gonna be? What is it gonna feature? What is it gonna look like? A complete plan with a timeline from now until election?
Our next 3 days have changed drastically right now. So I would,
'Cause I don't wanna see half-baked marketing materials.
Yeah.
Like some of the things that we see, I wanna see things that look professional.
Yeah, and I don't want to go weeks without us having something and have it, no,
Yeah, it
no.
makes legs of its own and goes on
Yeah.
and nobody knows
I
what we're
would,
talking
I would
about.
venture to say that
Like-
sometime next week I'll probably be at Region 13 doing videos, like we did at the previous district that I was at. I couldn't get the link to show how accurate those are. And the reason that you go with the service center to help you with this is because they're not out to make money on a school district. They're out to help a school district and to be a resource for us. The service that we're going to use through Region 13 and Sledge Engineering and they have a whole team of people that put together all of this information to help us. Am I right? You can probably talk
So
more
when
to
can
it.
you use kids' pictures and names? When are you allowed to do that in educational materials?
With parent permission.
So one of the questions I have for you is like, to me, every single day, I'd have a different social media push. And if you could use kids, I would have a kid that Coach Darnell has playing tennis who has said that we could use and it would be this mom benefits me, 6th grade tennis tennis player, because then that parent's gonna share it, that grandparent's gonna share it, and it's gonna get legs on faith.
Although I might not be able to do that.
No, you
School-wise.
can't
Yeah,
permit
that may be-
it. You can just
That's where we say the
inform.
But the
committee can do
community
it.
Right.
right?
Yes.
But you
Yeah.
can use that to inform, just not persuade.
But you could, okay, so you could put, if there's a way you could turn that into an educational message, it's not that hard.
It just has to be the facts. We
Yes,
have
it
to
could
put
be
the
the
facts out
It could
there.
be the facts, but remember, your community, and you have a very large and engaged planning committee. The facilities committee could turn around and form a PAC, political action committee. They're the advocacy wing for this. They're the ones who can do the more emotional information and social media blast.
So can y'all get your committee together and start?
I was gonna text, Dr. Benjamin, when we meet, so we can get the floor running,
Okay,
when we're ready.
good, okay. All right, anybody else have any questions? Is there anything else we need to do?
If I could get you to stay and sign some documents, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm gonna need a motion to adjourn then, please.
Madam President, move adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion by Henry and a second by Chris to adjourn. All in favor?
What do you believe?
Thank you. Passes 6-0 and the time is 8:19.
Can we take them to